this morning all the way from Germany, where she'll be addressing the topic of scientifically analyzing fashion consumers in Germany, a cross-cultural evolution for South African fashion retailers. We have got Boitumelo Pooe to address us. And Boitumelo, thank you so much for coming to Cape Town all the way from Germany. We are most grateful. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Neil. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this early in the morning. As Neil mentioned, I'm actually based in Germany at the moment, but I am South African, proudly so. And I'm going to be discussing just a cross-cultural analysis between German consumers and South African consumers. So currently, I actually just have data regarding German consumers. And I know some of you heard statistics and you thought, I'm not here for all of that. But it's really going to be quite informative. And one of the things I'm going to be highlighting in this presentation is just the importance of this kind of information and how it can actually make brands succeed a little bit better, do better in retail. So this was something that I work for a university called Day2 in Ravensburg, which is the south of Germany. And our market research students helped us collect this pilot study on German consumers. And I'm just going to be taking you through how we went about it so that you actually understand that this data is valid. Though it is a pilot study, which is a preparation to compare the consumers with South Africa. We're actually going to collect this data again for South Africa, and hopefully I can share it with you in the next year or 2 years perhaps, and see what are the difference between the consumers. Ooh, that went too far. Okay, so this is just the outline. I'm going to just take you through an introduction so that we all have a basic understanding, that we're on the same page, what I mean when I say fashion design entrepreneurs. Then after that, I'm going to just discuss the objectives and the questions that we're going to be answering. Then we will look at the research results with a lot of graphs, but I'm really going to explain that to you and the significance of those results. And finally, I will summarize all those results for you. So in terms of just fashion design entrepreneurs, what you're seeing here at All Fashion Sourcing, that's what we are talking about. We're talking about designers that own their own products or brand. They have to own their products or brand. We're talking about fashion designers that are still creative directors within their businesses. We are talking about fashion designers that are still largely involved in their fashion design and in the production process. They don't have to really make the clothing themselves, but they are really quite involved in that process. And we're talking about they manufacture their goods for more of the local market as well. That's who we're talking about. And they biggest market share is local. So these are the kind of fashion designers that we are actually addressing. So whenever I mention the word fashion design entrepreneurs or independent fashion brands or fashion designers, that's who we are talking about. And one of the criteria as well, I'm not sure if I mentioned it there, is that these are registered businesses that are active currently in the market. Okay, just to give you a context about Germany and South Africa. Germany is ranked 5th in terms of fashion revenue. This is after China, US, UK, and Japan, and Germany is number 5. So that is just the significance of the German fashion industry. And unlike all the other 3 as well, it's not really connected to how big the country is. Actually, Germany, in terms of area per square meter is smaller than South Africa, but it is actually more about how they have managed their retail. So that is one of the significant things what has made Germany number 5 in the world, and South Africa being number 37. And they are actually bringing in just under 20 billion euros in annual revenue per year, and then South Africa is just over 1 billion euros. So we worked it out in euros. I explained to you why we wanted to actually collect all this data. And the first one was to use the findings to provide fashion designers with the necessary tools and to support to gain consumer patronage in the international market, such as Germany. So if a South African fashion designer wants to branch out into Germany, they need to understand what are consumers looking for. They're not necessarily looking for their fame, for the followers. It's not that kind of market. They actually have solid requirements when it comes to fashion designers and to retailers. And the next one would be to assist the fashion entrepreneurs to achieve critical success factors. Sometimes we think about what is critical in succeeding in fashion. Is it the design? Is it the designer as themselves? But we need to know what are those critical success factors. And lastly, as well, to prepare just for a comparative study between Germany and South Africa, as I mentioned. Okay. So we're just going to be looking at the research objectives and the research questions. And just to sum these research questions for you, it's basically about the who. I'm going to be answering who are these consumers that actually buy from fashion design entrepreneurs, and how the measurements of these consumers would actually differ from Germany to South Africa. So we're going to just be looking at that. We're going to be looking at how often do they purchase from fashion design entrepreneurs. So that's one of the things that we're going to look at. And then the next thing, we're going to be looking at the preferences. What do they prefer from fashion design entrepreneurs? And then finally, we're going to look at why do the consumers in Germany buy from smaller brands instead of the large retailers as well? Why would they choose to do that? So these are the 4 questions that we're going to be looking at. It's basically the who, the how often, the preference, and finally the why, just to summarize it for you. Okay, and then the objectives of really closely linked to the question. Basically, it's the profile criteria of the fashion design entrepreneurs. I'm going to give you an overall profile, but firstly, I'm going to introduce to you how we got to that profile, and then the consumer buying behavior of small fashion design brands in Germany, and then we're going to looking at the consumer preferences as well between the small fashion designer brands and the big retailers. How far ahead is Germany? Does it match up? How's the competitive market? And the consumer needs and expectations to actually patronize fashion design entrepreneurs a little bit better. Okay, so these are the objectives which are really closely linked to the questions. Just to give you an idea about our quota, we use something called quota sampling. I will not bore you with that, and how many respondents we actually had from the study. Initially, we had people like 685 answer the questionnaire, but the quota, we actually wanted 450, and eventually we got to 469. And if people, for example, though we had 685, if people took just a little bit like 1 minute to complete what we know is a 5-minute survey, we would discard those answers. We got with unreasonable answers perhaps in the survey. If somebody just ticked 44444 for the survey, we discarded that. We just would know that they did not really read the questions. And then if also people failed the control questions, for example, if we ask somebody, are they employed, and they said no, so that would be a control question, because we would like to know that the people are actually able to afford the fashion design entrepreneurs kind of products. Okay, and if somebody called a friend and they took longer than expected when it comes to answering the questions, we also excluded that. So it moved from 685 to 469 respondents, which is also a little bit more than what we expected. So we collected this data via social media. The students still contacted their family and friends. So majority of it, it's still unknown, but it is from the students and how the students distributed this data. And some of it came from the internet and real life as well. Okay, so we're just going to take a look at the results of this data that we collected. And what we're going to be looking at is the target group profile. And with this target group profile, this is data we can actually get from that's readily available from places like Statista. So we are able to compare what Germany looks like and what South Africa looks like at this point, because we did not need to collect this data. And then when it comes to the personal characteristics, this is the specific kind of data we actually had to collect. So over here, we're going to be looking at even what are the further needs that would need to look at if we were to collect when we collect the South African data. Okay, and then the difference between Germany and South Africa. Okay, so the first one, with the quota sampling, how South Africa and Germany looks like, it's 50-50 almost, basically more so Germany when it comes to the division between male and female. So that is 50-50. And then we also look at the quota sampling. This is in terms of the collection of that sampling in Germany. We were able to almost meet that quota, with the females just being over 0.5%, and then with the males just being under by 1%. So the dark red would be the answers given, and the light pinkish would be the expected answers. So as you can see, with the answers given, it's just less than with the male, and then with the female, it's just over, just a little bit, probably by one person with that. Okay, and then over here we have the quota for income. We also used income as a quota, like these were one of our testing questions. Like if somebody said they did not have income, we'd be like, okay, we understand. We cannot really evaluate it fairly in that spectrum. And the quota, actually what's very interesting for me is just looking at the income distribution difference between South Africa and Germany. With Germany, it's a little bit like just wavy as well, and the difference is not even that much. But where else in South Africa, sorry, this is the age. This is the age. I'm going to just skip to you about the income since. Yeah, let's talk about the income. We'll come back to the age. I'm very excited about the income, looks like it. So with Germany, it looks as if it's more of like a medium. Has more of an average, even it lies in the middle, where else in South Africa, it lies more towards the lower end. That's where you find that the lower income bracket is the highest in South Africa. And in Germany is a little bit more distributed. And even in the difference of it, it's quite significant as well. So when we're looking at this income as well, the difference between the lowest income rate in Germany and in South Africa, it's actually 43.9%. So in South Africa, we have more people in the lower income ranges than we do in Germany. And that difference between the first one and in the lower range is 43.9%. So that would be the income differences. So that's something that you really need to consider when you are thinking of going overseas and thinking of going into the market overseas as well. Okay. So, and the reason, and we'll get into the reason for that, I'll go back to age, since I was very excited about that. And as you know, with the African market, that we have a growing younger population as well. So in South Africa, we have people between 25 and 39 being almost like 50% basically of the population. So, and then you'll see in Germany, you have the people born between 1957 and 1971 being the highest population. But in South Africa, it would would be more of the younger generation. 50% of the population is actually between 25 and 39. So that's something also to consider. So that would be the age, another quota sample that we used. And what we actually collected in terms of age was also very close by. There isn't such a significant difference between the answers given and the expected answers. I mean, the highest difference we have is like 6.3. So there's still a good representation of how the population looks like and what is the expectations of the population. And as we discussed the income, and in terms of the income as well, there was not such a vast difference between Germany and between the answers given and the expected answers as well. So again, we don't have anything over 10% in terms of difference. So it almost also represents the population. Just with this, we just got more people in the lower income rate than we expected. So that is another consideration that you can think about while I'm actually going through the rest of the data, that we got more people in the lower income rates than we actually expected in Germany. But I'll also discuss that a little bit more in detail. Okay, so there isn't so much of an extreme difference as well. And then in Germany, now this is the quota where we could actually compare. And now this is now the actual things that we collected from the survey, the actual data we collect from the survey. And one of the first ones was about the marital status. And between married, single, living in partnership, divorced or widowed as well. And most of the surveyed people were married that we looked at. So, and you may be wondering why we looked at that. It's in close consideration to this quota of the children in the household. Very interestingly enough, there are more people had no children in the household, though there's more people married. Okay, so this speaks of the disposable income. When somebody is married, they have the joint income, and then there's no children, that means there's joint income, which is really more disposable as well. Okay, so that is very interesting because you'd think that it slants the other way around, that there are more people married, so there's more people in the more children in the household, but it's actually the other way around. And I can attest to this because I've got a few friends like that as well. Okay, so and the next one would be the education criteria, which is quite different. One of the things that we're going to need to consider when we are comparing Germany and South Africa is that their education is a little bit more different. And what we found here is that more of the people that support fashion design entrepreneurs actually have bachelor's or master's degrees in Germany. So they have continued to study further, which is not a must in Germany. It's not like the most popular thing to go to university, otherwise you'll fail. I'm saying this because the education is actually spread out in the pink. Like you have Grundschule, which is primary school, you have Hauptschule, which is the middle school, and then you have Realschule as well, which is like a technical school where you have your N3s and N2s in South Africa. But once you are finished in middle school or in technical school, you can skip all of that and you can just go to Berufsausbildung, which means that it's vocational study and work. And you can work and study and earn money. And that is actually a viable way of getting money. You really do get a decent income after middle school and technical school in terms of employment. Whereas in South Africa, after middle school, to get a decent employment income would be very difficult, or even it would pose even difficult to afford fashion design entrepreneurs, where else in Germany it's not necessarily like that. Okay, so that's just the difference in terms of schooling and what really need to consider that. And what is similar is in terms of the diploma, the degree, and as well as the postgraduate studies of master's and bachelor. But it's quite interesting that it is the people that have bachelor's and master's that actually support fashion design entrepreneurs. Okay, so the next thing that we found out is that in total, the majority of the respondents live in the city and in large towns as well. And this is another difference that we'll need to consider for South Africa, because what rural areas mean in Germany is totally different to what rural areas mean in South Africa. We would have to consider that difference. Rural areas in Germany may actually mean more money than people in the cities and large towns. Whereas in South Africa, rural areas and villages definitely means less money than people in large cities and large towns. So those are the things we'd need to consider as well, and would also need to put into consideration the townships and maybe informal settlements, because we cannot discard those the people living in townships and informal settlements and say that they're not interested in fashion design entrepreneurs. As we know, some of us who've been there or who come from there, we are interested in that. And I say we because I also come from there as well. You know, so there are people that are interested in fashion design entrepreneurs, and we would need to also consider that as well. And also, it would be interesting in South Africa to see what is the percentage, how much they spend, and even looking at the comparative data in Germany. But this is not matching apples with apples. I think this is one of the things we need to understand, that these are two very different demographics. Okay, so the next one that we did not collect is the data on ethnicity. So there was no data on ethnicity in Germany. And I'm going to read you something over here just to give you a little bit of context why we didn't initially do that. Firstly, because these were students that were collecting this data, German students, and ethnicity is quite a sensitive thing. It's still an argument, it's still a debate that German society has when it comes to collecting data on ethnicity. Eventually we will, it's not illegal. We just have to be very sensitive and conscious of the needs of the society and of the population around us. So just read you this. If you don't want to create racism, this is one of the arguments in Germany. If you don't want to create racism, you have to avoid using categories. This was said by Simon Patrick, a senior researcher at the National Institute of Demographic Studies. And then everyone in German, the thinking goes, and should be treated the same across all board. Okay, so that's one of the arguments that came from Germany when it comes to ethnicity. And then some of these lofty principles aimed at boosting equality, but many feel that the harm of racial progress in the country that prides itself, and this is the next now argument, in a country that prides itself on the use of data and evidence, the lack of information speaks volume. The result says, that if you're not counted, you don't count. So this comes from the African diaspora. This comes from the different kind of cultures and other people that live in Germany as well, that they feel that they're not counted, so they don't count. I'm actually quoting people, it's not me really. And then it just also just shows as well why we would like to really collect the data of ethnicity. There are various things, because it has become really increasingly important that when we are selling to the consumers, when we are looking at addressing consumers, we're not just addressing the privileged majority or the privileged it doesn't matter, minority, but we are actually addressing consumers as a whole. And as you know, you need to actually speak to a person personally to actually get to them. And if you don't know where they come from or what their story is and what matters to them, it's quite difficult to do that. So understanding the specific ethnic groups is quite important for this study, and that is the next step that we're going to venture in. One of the most important things that we're actually going to be looking at is, though in Germany, that we have to consider is that when we're collecting this data, there has to be a a section where we say that we are not comfortable in disclosing this information. And that also is something we can report on, I think, in terms of data and how many people would say that they're not comfortable in collecting this in disclosing this kind of information because of what you would know happened with the World War IIs and how data was used in the country in terms of ethnicity. Okay, so this is one of the quotes I absolutely love, and I think it just sums it up on the importance of why we actually collect this ethnicity data, because it speaks somehow, not completely, of personality traits, cultural values and norms. I totally agree with that second one, biological and physical characteristics as well. And there's a lot of studies, and as South Africans, we also know, because we're just such a diverse country, that when it comes to ethnicities, also different body types. So you need to understand that when there's a certain ethnic group, there's a certain type of body type you are designing for, you are actually manufacturing for as well. So that is really important. Okay, and then I also came across this study from WGSN, where they speak about future trends as well. It says for intentional community that we have to now, the consumers are moving towards intentional communities. And I'm just going to read that first top part for you at the top there. It says communities and collectives that consume, let me enlarge that. The communities and the collectives that consumers are part of have become more digital, social, local, and rooted in shared cultures or values, resulting in new ecosystem of buyers and creators who collaborate and connect in order to trade. And we have also seen, when it comes to intentional communities in the last years, movements like Buying Black, for examples, which is a movement of supporting Black-owned businesses to balance competition and the economic kind of scales as well. So these are more of the intentional values and the intentional kind of communities that we have even seen in South Africa growing. And one of the other trends that I actually came across in WGSN is the bank on heritage kind of thing, in banking and heritage. And it's so important for fashion designers to understand the heritages surrounding them as well, and how to bank on them accordingly to avoid cultural appropriation. And when we understand the ethnicity and the diversity around us, those kind of things can be avoided. Because I really believe that all this cultural appropriation comes also from just a lack of information, a lack of understanding of the diversity around you. And unfortunately, European countries are not as diverse as us, so they don't understand what it is, who is around them, and how certain designs, how certain communications actually impact on the different communities. So that is quite important. And it also, just in terms of going back to this report over here, it speaks about how it would be important, and in one of the design actions at the bottom there, speaks about how it would be important to have some element of heritage incorporated in designs as well. So it's those are the things that are quite important to actually identify and to see that and to give information to designers in what they need to bank on. Okay, and then the next one that we looked at, actually this is the last one in terms of the personality traits. We looked at the different generations in Germany who's actually supporting fashion design entrepreneurs, and we found that Gen X is the largest one, which is the people born from 1946 to 1964, probably because also of the income levels, and then as well as Gen Y. Okay, and as you saw in the data before, that is not really the majority of people in, but Gen X is, but Gen Y is not, that support local fashion design, local fashion designers in Germany. So these are the people that actually support them. And then we have over here, now I'm just going to touch a little bit on the consumer buying behavior, so the shopping frequency, how to consumers in Germany shop, the average money spent on, it's in euros, unfortunately, and converting it would really be doing it an injustice. So I think it's quite important to understand, as well as for fashion designers, the different currencies and the meaning of just the different price points as well, and to research the price points. And then the information channel, where they get their information and this shopping motivation. I'm just going to touch a little bit on the shopping behavior during COVID-19. Ooh, we have a graph missing there. This is basically, it just outlines the different supporters in this graph of the German consumers, looking at followers and alpha leaders, who are these, the different kind of characteristics. I'm just going to try explain it to you. But basically what the graph looked at eventually is that the supporters of small independent brands are more planned and more ethical than people who buy from bigger retailers. So in this section, another thing that I would like you to note is that we're really comparing the fashion designers, and then we're comparing like just smaller, middle-sized corporate brands, like Esprit in Germany, for example, and in South Africa, the ones you'll find like in Woolies, like Country Road, Trenery, those kind of smaller ones. Okay, so we're comparing that with the middle and small size retailers, and also with the large national, international retailers. That's the three we are comparing. Okay, so that is just a note for this one. Okay, so in terms of euros and how much a consumer is willing to spend on a t-shirt price, and we did use t-shirt price because that would be the lowest price point of a designer in a retail store, for example. So small designer supporters are spending more money on small designer brands than on corporate designer brands. So the consumers are expecting to spend more money. So there's not just a slight difference regarding the other two groups as well. So they do expect to spend a little bit more money when it comes to fashion designer brands. That was not a surprise outcome at all. And then with this one, we are looking at comparing how much they buy. So how do consumers buy? Do they buy weekly? That was the question. Do you go shopping weekly, several times a month, once a month, several times a year, or once a year? And we found that overall there are only a few differences, but the small designer brand supporters show a higher shopping frequency at several times a month instead of once a month. Okay, so what that means of going shopping several times a month, you have to understand that fashion design consumers who support fashion design entrepreneurs don't do bulk buying. So they'll buy one thing, and maybe later on in the month they may feel that they need another thing. So they do not buy bulk buying. And we'll also talk a little bit more about that as well. It shows up in the data that we collected later. Okay, and then it's going a little bit too fast. And the information channel, of course, we expect this. What's very interesting with the information channel as well is that you can see the final block at the end there is for towards the end. So that final block at the end, it's for large independent retailers, national and international. And as you can see, the majority of information is from family and friends. So word of mouth is still very big for them. But when you look at the first block on the other end, not so much. It is still quite important. Word of mouth, it's very interesting how family and friends influence or give information to other family friends. And then with the first one, for independent small designer brands, you see that social media is the prominent feature and the way, the prominent information channel for consumers who buy from fashion design entrepreneurs. So these are just the major differences and how the two graphs actually slant a little bit in different ways. So for retailers, they would need to also focus on getting good word of mouth. They would need to focus as well in terms of social media a little bit. Television, which is the last one, really does not matter for consumers who buy from fashion design entrepreneurs, where else it does a little bit more for consumers who buy from larger retailers. So this is quite interesting because it slants a little bit different with the two graphs at the end as well. This remote does not like me. Okay, so majority of people just go shopping for fashion when they need something. So it's not for fun. It's not that they want to interact with people. It's not a social thing. And it's not something that they do to reduce stress in Germany. That actually it's a functional thing. Whenever they need something, they go shopping. That is the main reason. And generally across the board, shopping did decrease in Germany during COVID-19. And one of the things that we found out that shopping, however, did also increase online, of course, in Germany during COVID-19. Okay. Cool. So looking at this in terms of the buying behavior from the German consumers, one of the trends that we also identified that are closely linked to this is the push for progress, which speaks about ethical and actually looking at ethical buying, they don't do bulk buying, for example, looking at buying when you need something, you don't just buy because you have stress or you are stressed out. But one of the things we're going to need to consider, especially when we're looking at the South African market about pushing for progress and what does ethical buying mean? Because for German consumers, ethical buying means that just for more of the environment. But ethical buying also is highly connected to CSR kind of efforts, and it could mean ethical labor, it could mean environmental ethics, that is actually more of the push for German consumers. It could mean transparency of the brand. It could mean inclusivity. So how inclusive is the brand? It could mean community and cause driven. And I found this very interesting one on WGSN. Just even in preparation of comparing Germany and South Africa, this is a comparison between, I think it's the UK or London. Yep, it's the UK and the US. So they're comparing the difference in terms of ethical buying. And if you can see over there in the UK, it's the first graph on the, is it your right or left? Okay. It's that first graph. The environmental ethical behavior is the most important one for the UK, interestingly enough. But when you look at the US, where we have seen a lot of just even uprising, a lot of movements against exclusivity, against just even racial injustice, what is most important would be the greenish one, I could say, which is inclusivity in America. That is the most important one. So consumers look for inclusivity in the US, where else in the UK they would look for environmental friendliness. And the next one they look for in the US would be community, and then ethical labor as well is a big one, and then environmental friendliness. And in the UK, it's the environmental friendliness and as well as ethical labor. So it would be interesting again, because this graph, when it speaks of the UK and the US, is already a vast difference. So it would be interesting to see the big difference when it comes to Germany and South Africa. So when you are actually going into the German market, it is very important to highlight the environmental friendliness of the garments, how the processes were made as well, how the garments were made, the processes of the garments as well. Okay, so And these two markets, we would think that they're quite similar, but Germany and South Africa are not that similar, so that would be also one of the interesting things to find out. Okay, and lastly, we're going to look at the buying criteria and the shopping preferences of German consumers. And with the first one of the buying criteria, there was not really a significant difference, but one thing that we saw is that quality is the most important factor for buying fashion design entrepreneurs. Quality, not design. It does not say design, that's not, and even nearest to shop is not the most important thing, and even the brand is not the most important thing. So how the clothing made, it's the most important factor for consumers buying from fashion design entrepreneurs. So quality is the most important one. Okay, and then this just has its own mind. The next one would be, again, quality showing in a form of durability. That's another important quality for consumers buying from fashion design entrepreneurs. That durability is the most important one after environmentally friendly production and also after social responsible production as well. So the clothing need to be more durable, they need to last longer, and you really do see that when it comes to certain German designs and why it is number 5 in the world in terms of the different retailers and the kind of quality that comes out from Germany. Okay, and then also, just quite interesting, exclusivity was not quite a criteria. It's not the most important thing. So it's not something that can be highlighted for fashion design, for consumers buying from fashion design entrepreneurs. So you don't have to say how exclusive it is. We just made 5, we just made 10. It is not one of the most important criteria when it comes to consumers buying from fashion design entrepreneurs. What they would like is that it has good quality and it has good durability. One of the things, even just in terms of observation of the German market, is that they don't necessarily mind looking the same as long as the clothes last for a very long time as well. Okay, and then the shopping preference as well. Price was not such a huge thing, but consumers buying from fashion designers prefer intensive consultation from fashion purchasers. And in other words, you have to know your product. They need to be somebody who is able to consult with the consumer when they are in the store. So they do prefer communication and they would like to know more about the product. If it's online, then that means that there has to be a lot of information about the product online. I would really advise you to maybe go to Zalando, which is one of the biggest online retailers for Germany. And you'll see if you click on one of them or even look at a few German fashion designers, there is a lot of information. And they will tell you what it means. And they tell you certain things about the product as well. So this is one of the most important things of consulting, and they want to know more about the brand. Where do you come from? That's the kind of information that they really would prefer. So what does this mean? One of the things about exclusivity, durability, and quality, we looked at this and linked it very closely. We linked it very closely to embracing frugality. And in other words, how Germans embrace frugality in terms, because even of COVID-19, of what has happened, it's in terms of quality and durability. In other words, they wouldn't frequently just buy a new item, but they'll buy because they need something and they don't want to waste money in the clothes that they buy. So that's very important as well. But it would also be very interesting to see how South Africans embrace frugality, because it could be different from German consumers looking at the two income brackets. Because South Africans, for example, could embrace it in terms of the price points. They could say that we're not going to pay a lot of money for this. And maybe quality is not as highly important as it is for for German consumers. So this is another kind of comparison we're going to have to look at, how the frugality, how quality, how durability actually matters, and exclusivity. It could actually matter more for South Africans if the price points actually also matter. So this is another thing that we're going to look at, and it's quite interesting to see how the German consumers embrace that. So I'm finally going to summarize this for you and to tell you and answer the 4 questions that we looked at. And the first one would be, who are these consumers? So who are the consumers? What's the demographic, the personality traits of buying from fashion designer brands? And the first thing we recognize is that they're female. Females are still the predominant buyers. They're born between 1982 and 1996. They are either married or single. They have no children in the household. They live in cities or large towns. They are educated, and they earn, this is the middle income bracket in Germany, between 2,600 and 4,400 and just under 4,500 euros. And then are extrovert, altruistic, alpha leaders, planned, and ethical. So these are the people that actually buy from fashion designers in Germany. Okay, and the next question is, how would the measurements of the consumer personality traits in Germany differ from South Africa? So in terms of just the difference, we would need to look at the ethnicity, and also consider in terms of that the homogeneous and the heterogeneous of the two kind of markets, Germany being very homogeneous and then South Africa being very diverse and heterogeneous in that sense. The education criteria needs to be matched accordingly and also discussed separately as well. And the last one would be the residential differences, because there's a market when it comes to rural and village areas in Germany, where else in South Africa may not be that kind of, may not be that way. So this is the criteria that we need to look at. And the second question, how do consumer purchase from designers? So in that sense, we saw that, in that sense, we saw that the supporters of small designer brands buy at least 66.6 from small designer businesses. So they actually buy more than 50%. The supporters are real supporters. They buy more than 50% of their product from fashion designers. Okay, so of course those margins, we would love for everyone to buy 100% from fashion designers. But as you know, there's things like basics, there's underwear that still needs to progress in the market. There's shoes that still need to progress in the market. So within this group, more than every second person goes shopping for fashion several times a year. So 56.4, they go shopping several times a year. Supporters of the small designer brands only differentiate regarding the shopping frequency. So they go shopping several times a month, like more than the other ones, and less often once a month than the other groups. Again, this is the whole ideology of bulk buying versus just in terms of needs. Okay, and one of the things that I would highly recommend when it comes to fashion designers when looking at this data is that when you are actually doing your financial projections, you need to consider this. I think some of the mistakes that have been made is that people think that, oh, a customer will come and buy the whole outfit and buy a jacket and do that kind of bulk buying you may see in larger retailers. That's not the case. They may come for one thing and then maybe at another time in the month come for another. And even in the communication and the assistance of the salespeople, you have to give the consumer the time to say, go think about it, and understand that is not a lost sale. That could be a sale for later. That's just generally how the consumers would purchase, specifically in the German market as well. Okay, and then still it's lagging behind in terms of consumers supporting fashion design entrepreneurs. So do consumers prefer to buy from fashion design entrepreneurs, retail, larger retailers, Germany is still ranking number 5. And I did explain that one of the reasons is because of just the retail market. The larger retailers is still the big preference in Germany. But 10.8, still quite small in Germany, the market. But it's one of those things that can be improved, but there is still some form of market. Okay, so the reasons why people buy from fashion designers in Germany and why they would go and say, oh, you're a fashion designer, is because they have planned their purchase and they thought about their purchase and said that I need this. It's something that is more conscious decision for certain products. It's because they want ethical clothing. So it's very important when you are going in that market that you consider to communicate how ethical the clothing is. And I think the biggest conversation at the moment in Germany is environmental friendliness. They prefer the small retail stores. This is another one that we saw. So if you are a fashion designer in Germany, it does not make sense to sell in the big retailers or to have your product line in a big retailer. It's better to actually have it in a smaller kind of store or online even. It's quite interesting because we have a big retailer in the south of Germany. It's just in the south of Germany. It's called Reichmann. But in the city I live in, there's one big store, and then you find these small little pockets of the same store all around the city. Like they have actually split it up all around the city to because it's smaller, it's intimate, it's easier for the customers as well. And apparently that works, just those smaller kind of pockets. And then one of the reasons that the fashion designers actually, consumers buy from fashion designers, is that they are not depending on current trends. Okay, so they want something that is not just current, that will not be just for the season, but will be continuous for other seasons as well. Durability, remember, and quality. That's the main things. Okay, and then just in terms of trend and looking at that, it would be the end of more. That's what the German consumers are actually kind of aligning with the trend from WGSN again, is the end of more. And I'm just going to read that top part for you. It says that enforced isolation will amplify 2021 minimalist-led micro drivers with more considered consumption, focusing future products' requirements around utility, versatility, and longevity. So this is basically how I would really describe the German market, is that in terms of this WGSN projection, the end of more. And that's it. I hope I made stats interesting. And those are my details if you have any further questions. And the bottom one is Professor Dr. Thomas Doubelstein, who is my supervisor and who also helped me with all these stats. Yes, and thanks for coming to listen.